This is FTG Podcast, sponsored by Vedic Meditation with Matt Cardone. Vedic meditation is a ancient technique that works with a mantra. I've been practicing this meditation for the last 3 years. Mantra literally translates into mind vehicle, right? Man is mind, tra is vehicle. So this mantra is a poetic sound, which is a bija mantra. It's void of meaning. And the purpose of it is to take the mind from grosser states of thought down to the subtlest form of thought, leave the mind, eventually where there's no thought and no mantra, which is then to soak in what we would call cosmic consciousness, the kingdom of heaven, or whatever you would like to call it. This practice has easily been the most transformative thing in my life the last 3 years. If you're interested in it, you can hit me up, ask about it. You can go to mattcardonemeditation.com and request a phone call with him. Highly recommend it. Again, thank you, Matt Cardone, for sponsoring this podcast. I'm grateful to be a part of something that has radically changed my life.
What's the eternal principle?
Brahman.
Which is?
Well, we call it God, but that personifies it.
Anyways, Phil Treiber is on the podcast, everybody. First and foremost, Phil is a homie. He's a friend. I met this guy 2.5 years ago. We used to work together. He is a therapist. He is a Vedic meditation practitioner. And he recently started his own practice, Dude Breathe Counseling. And his advocate and his specificity is on men's issues, right? And teaching and showing men how to navigate, if you will, their femininity and unravel emotions and let that be in a manner of masculinity and allow that to be part of masculinity. So I'm super happy that you're on here and I'm excited to get into it. How we doing?
Appreciate you inviting me on to do this, man. Yeah, it's always weird to hear people talk about me still.
Yeah.
Right, even the things I've accomplished, things that I've
was
done.
just the nice stuff.
Yeah, I know. It's wild, right? It's all true. You know,
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, so I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So how long have you been a therapist?
So I've been working in the treatment and the mental health counseling industry for probably 5-6 years.
Yeah.
But then I graduated with my master's degree in 2020. So I've been a clinician for coming up on, oh my goodness, 3 years?
No shit.
3 years total.
Okay.
Yeah. That was a primary in a treatment center down here where we met. And then, I left and opened up Dude Breathe Counseling about 16 months ago.
Right. And how's it been going since?
It's doing very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people are really connecting with the entire message. You know,
The name is awesome, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it.
I didn't want to go with like a Treiber psychotherapy because there's so
Yeah.
many like people's last names psychotherapy.
Well, I didn't realize at first when you first came out with it. I'm like, that's kind of like nailing them to a corner of the room. But I didn't realize that. You're like, no, it's just I'm working with just men.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, I do have a couple women on my caseload specifically for like my expert side of my anxiety work and like relationship stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, vast majority of my caseload is all guys. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's individual, right? But then you also do groups and caseloads or like seminars and stuff?
Yeah, so in the state of Florida, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I am a master's level certified addictions professional, nationally certified counselor, certified clinical treatment anxiety professional, like all these.
I'm an anxiety professional.
So am I. You know,
big anxiety guy, big depression guy too.
Yeah,
and they're both there for me every morning.
Yeah,
yep.
They're some of my best friends, but I've learned how to wrangle them. You know, sometimes you get a stick and you just kind of whack them in the forehead and be like, no, not now.
Like a whack-a-mole game.
Exactly. But yeah, so a vast majority of my practice is individual work with guys, and then I do run a men's group called The Stresses of Life. And there's a very specific clinical reason of why I chose that name. And yeah, we meet Thursday nights, and I got about 6, 7 guys in it now. And it's all guys. It kind of morphed into this relationship divorce group of all these guys that have really struggled in their relationships over the years. And they kind of found me. Either they were referred by one of their therapists, or they found me online in my marketing, and they love it.
Yeah.
These guys really look forward to coming, because it's like in a lot of other areas of their life, like they don't have really meaningful relationships. They don't have places that they can actually feel comfortable and vulnerable and intimate. And these guys come into the group, and we get into it, and we talk about everything. And really, I'm like, part of it is that me teaching them how to be vulnerable, how to communicate differently, as opposed to like coming in with that masculine machismo male code type stuff that has inhibited them in so many other areas of their life. They can come in here and kind of workshop and try out something differently.
Yeah, I mean, for what I've realized over the years, for a man to even get into the therapy door, to even knock on the door and have a first session is a big deal.
Brutal. I mean, it's one of the things that like I'm going to start getting like an email list together, and because I've deep dove into this myself. Okay. Right. Like the men's stuff is not something that we learn in school.
Did you have like personal experience growing up with this? Like,
oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of and it's like anybody.
Obviously, like there's a reason why you chose such a specific discipline, which we need that.
We need it desperately.
We need that
to the point where I can name one other guy, a clinician down here in the sea of therapists here in South Florida that actually specializes in men's issues.
Okay.
Right. One other guy.
Guy.
So every time that I go into, because also, me being a cisgender, heterosexual, white male as a therapist, well, I'm kind of a unicorn in itself. But then when I go into these massive...
Why is that a unicorn?
I think it's because of the actual therapy room itself, right? I mean, like the therapeutic space is inherently feminine. That's one of the reasons why men have so much difficulty coming into therapy.
Yeah. That's a good point, because my therapist is gay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this the thing is like, and it's mostly people from the LGBTQ plus community, and they usually most of the time specialize in different things, right?
Yeah.
But then it's mostly women. Mm-hmm. So when I go into a networking event and I stand up, I'm quite sure of myself at times, right? I can sell myself. I have a big personality. And I stand up and say, my name's Phil Treiber and LMHC. I operate Dude Breathe Counseling, where I specialize in men's mental health. You see their eyes open up, right?
Really?
Like there's times where I've literally gotten to networking events with like 10, 15 cards, and I've run out. Because all of these other clinicians, these social workers, these LMHCs, these LMFTs, they're like, we need this so desperately. I have a case for you. Because they don't know anyone else in this industry down here, really. I mean, at least that I know of. I've only been doing this a short time. That specializes in this men's issue stuff. So that's the thing, is like that feminine aspect of the field itself. It's like anybody in the helping profession, right? Going back to your question, is like nurses, doctors, therapists. A lot of us therapists either got into this space because of our own difficulties and struggles over the years, or they had a family member, or there's another reason why they wanted to be in a space where they wanted to help people.
Sure.
And I think that nurturing, that emotions and feelings side of it is so counterintuitive to a lot of the traditional male role that we've been taught and socialized with over our lives.
Yeah.
That there's not many men that go into therapy.
That's good to know, because I mean, I honestly wouldn't think that would be a unicorn thing. I feel like they would just be like, I'm focused on men's health, and I know that we do need it. I grew up single mom, right? And shout out to all the single moms, you're fucking superheroes. And my mom, thought she could be everything to me, that she thought she could be a mom and dad. And my mom definitely has a masculine energy, she's a little Irish badass, you know.
She's tough.
She's tough, man. And she showed me tough love, and showed me a lot of great things. But for whatever reason, I was always really sensitive. Mm-hmm. Really sensitive.
As was I.
I was so sensitive.
As was I.
Like way too much, right? And I remember being envious of the guys that I would see that are just like, I don't give a fuck. And they were, kind of assholes and tough and bravado. And I didn't have that. And so and I'm just kind of talking about this now and realizing this. it made me feel like there was something wrong with me, like just inherently, like you're wrong, you're flawed. There's just some part of this masculine gene that you don't have. Like I didn't know how to be one of the boys and talk shit. You know, I had to figure that out.
Right. No, and that's the socialization process. That's not the genes that you have. There's actually a lot of research that shows the reason why you felt that way.
Yeah, and like so now as I get older, so when I got sober, what I kind of like the way I break it down, and obviously I can't see my own ears, right? But I went from like this very, very oversensitive, over emotional person. And when I had that, I suffered greatly, got into addiction. Like that was the only thing that like gave me the I don't give a fuck because I couldn't bear it.
Right.
When I got sober and I knew that the fight was like, I just knew that I was done. I knew that I wasn't going to do drugs anymore. And it was the greatest feeling I ever had. And with that came a new level of confidence.
Sure.
And this kind of like, I don't give a fuck character Scott showed up, but like, not in a bad way. It was like I was so excited to have it, but then I overshot the mark. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I went from like this fucking...
The pendulum swung way too far.
It swung and smacked the other end of the wall. You know what? I pushed a lot of people away from me, and I made a lot of fucking mistakes.
Of course.
A lot of amends, you know?
I mean, that's how we learn.
Right. So like now, and after realizing that, and I really only realized that like year 3, maybe 3 years ago, and I'm like, I should probably dial this back. Like it is... Like I should want to be kind. I should care about, because you get this like, Matt, like, why are you going to walk around caring about everyone else's feelings? And it's like, okay, well, you don't need to walk around dominated by, oh my God, what do they think of me? What should I say? But you should also be cognizant of like, hey, I don't want to bring harm to you.
Right.
You know? And so anyways, like
that's finding the gray area.
Yeah. And it
is what we need to do.
Yeah.
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 No, because that's the whole idea is that, and I see this with my clients, right? Most of the time when the guys come in the room, they are far too on to the side of the masculine side.
Okay.
Right? It is that cutoff side that you kind of recorrected onto.
And so when you say far too on the masculine side, explain what you mean for people listening.
So within and we can talk about the socialization process of why you felt like you didn't have that, right? Like that's something, it's same idea. So Terry Real, who's a big guy in the men's world, he wrote a great book on male depression, but he does a lot of couples work, but he specializes in narcissistic and difficult men. And I've done a lot of his trainings. I've read some of his books. And one of the things that he talks about is that in the socialization process of us as boys in society, due to our primary caregivers, our fathers, or other people in our world, including the women, there's this socialization process to where a whole person is a circle, right? But we are taught to cleave off that other side of anything that could be potentially deemed as feminine, which is feelings and emotions, which is compassion, empathy, our sensitive side. And what that does, that leaves us with only being half a person. And that is with the very traditional role of the assertiveness, the strength, the put your boots on, go to work, the don't show any weakness whatsoever. And a lot of men are left with that. And we wonder why so many of them struggle with substance abuse. I mean, we don't really talk about it much, but the highest level of suicide are with men, right? Specifically middle-aged to older men.
Yeah.
But that's because they're left with this idea of that's what a man needs to be. He doesn't care about other people's feelings. He doesn't care about people's emotions. If he shows these things, he's vulnerable.
He's a bitch.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He's a pussy. He's weak. And by far, right, the worst thing that we could be called on the schoolyard is gay, or the F word that goes along with that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing that keeps us in that box of the boy code that polices us to not experience feelings and emotions. Or when we do, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Right. Like the same thing you talk about the single mother. Like I've been trying to get the social media going. I got a message from a Latina single mother this morning about how difficult it is coming from her home country in Mexico, coming to live here in the States, raising a 17-year-old and a 10-year-old boy without a father. She's like, how do I raise them right?
Wow, that's beautiful that she reached out to you, man.
Yeah, it's great. I mean,
and you're not a father.
No.
Right?
No.
Do you find that to be a barrier when you're trying to help other men? Kind of like a dude that would be like, you can't help me with my addiction. You ain't never done dope type thing.
I haven't run into it specifically because I think that, I mean, one of the biggest things that I do with guys is that, and one of the most important aspects of therapy is really building a strong rapport.
Okay.
Right? If you don't have that therapeutic rapport, if these guys don't believe in what you're saying and they don't trust you, they're not going to believe anything that you're saying. And that's actually one of the greatest indicators that we have, is that like even like your connection with your therapist, regardless of all the fancy techniques, the shiny new baubles you get at the conferences or anything else, if you actually just like your therapist, that's actually going to be a higher indicator of your well-being and if you're going to get better or not.
Sure, yeah.
So building this rapport with men in session is actually one of the things I have in my training for organizations and other therapists, because that thing is one of the most important aspects to working with men in the therapeutic space.
Yeah.
So even though like I'm not a father, I've never been married, right? I still have my experience of going through relationships, having difficulties and learning from those things, as well as having, outside of my own personal experience, this subject matter expert air of where like I've done the research, I've done the trainings, I'm licensed in the state of Florida, I've dug into these things ad nauseum to be able to come relay that information to them. And the same thing, I'm not going to tell them how to raise their kids,
Right.
but I'm going to share my experience and my information about these things, and they can take with it what they do.
Right.
You know, I never tell my guys what to do, right? The whole idea is, the way that I frame therapy is that we're walking a path in the woods in the dark, right? I'm a firm believer that all my guys have everything that they need inside of them.
Yeah, I agree.
There's all this shit and blocks that are blocking them from it.
Sure.
So my job is to kind of just hold the flashlight above their shoulder and be like, hey, dude, there's the path, but you got to walk it,
Yeah.
right? I know the path. I can see the path in the woods because I've walked it before. I'm a therapist. I'm a man. I've made mistakes. I've grown. I've done these things. And hey, dude, there's the path, but you got to walk it. And sometimes I got a sharp stick behind them, poking them in the right direction. But yeah, I don't really tell them what to do, nor have I gotten really any pushback about the father stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful, because I don't think you need to be a father to offer someone an enlightened view.
Right.
You know, I think that if we resign to that it's just gonna limit our potential to grow.
1,000%. It's the same thing if you go to a doctor and you have like, you know, brain cancer. You're going to sit there and ask the doctor, hey man, doc, have you ever had brain cancer?
A brain tumor?
Right.
No. Well,
No,
fucking...
well, this guy's a beat. I'm going to go find someone who actually has, right? It, you know, it's like, it's that cop out, like you said, like we hear people in therapy in treatment with a therapist who is armed with this information and these tools to help them.
Yeah.
They're like, man, you never been there. You don't know what I'm going through.
Yeah.
But even then, it's like there's a difference between understanding the experience directly and then having compassion and empathy.
Yeah. You know, I'm really happy we're talking about this. You're the first therapist on here, by the way.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'm really in it. I'm proud. I'm honored, you know.
Yeah, dude. I'm psyched to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. I say this all the time, but the most beneficial thing that's happened in my life in the last 3 years was intensive therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I never realized that, you know, the power in that. I would say that and meditation. And I started them both kind of around the same time. So it was quite the launch in another direction.
Yeah, that must have been quite the...
Yeah. And so I love the flashlight metaphor. And I've said this before, but I don't know if you've heard it. So I remember walking into, you know, you walk in, you sit down, you're like, I don't know this fucking guy for nothing. What's going on? You know?
Filled out all that paperwork.
Yeah,
like, this is weird. Like, what's HIPAA? Like, I tell this guy this thing.
Right. So my sponsor at the time referred him to me. And the dude's got like 30 years sober, like I said, gay man. Mm-hmm. And he goes, all right, like, why don't you tell me who you are? And I was like, all right. So I gave him the 10-minute spiel.
Sure.
Right?
The elevator pitch.
Yeah. I gave him the spiel, and he goes, that's real good, Scott. He goes, most people in recovery give me the recovery talk, but I asked you who you were. And he just completely disregarded my whole story, the whole narration. And then it was like almost like a flashlight is dying, and you go... And then all of a sudden some light came on, and it was like, what if I got this wrong? And like my first thing was like, I'm about to bounce. Fuck all this noise. You know?
Because it's going to challenge you to actually start to think about it in a different
and that's
aspect.
the second thing that happened. I'm like, well, and then it became like this exciting thing because I had already had a taste the past 3 years of what happens when you end up being wrong about your own story, and goodness and goodness and freedom are on the other side of that.
Yep.
So I like that flashlight because it's almost like he created my flashlight for me, and he just kind of holds it up and reminds me.
Sure.
And he always just says this thing, are you in line with your integrity? And then I'll go in sometimes, and he goes, I don't know, it sounds like you're not in line with your integrity. And he never, ever tells me what to do.
Right.
It's so annoying. He just gets me. He gets me to remember and speak in my own truth, you know? And I never realized.
So important.
Yeah. And you know what? It's all trauma, man. Every fucking thing. It's all trauma. It's all the generational trauma, and you know, the parent growing up underneath a traditional view that was oppressed and abusive, and then not dealing with that, and it's this energy that just gets passed on for generation and generation. And I just never saw it, and a whole new world opened up.
That perspective shift, that paradigm shift.
Yeah, and then you start getting, you're like,
So
okay,
important.
well, let's look at this fucking paradigm, because there's clearly a 12-year-old scared little boy in me, or 8 years old or whatever. And I always thought this inner child shit they talked about was corny.
Oh no, it's
and
the best.
I found out they were right.
Oh man,
you know, and now I'm a huge inner child guy. You know, I
Yeah,
love
dude.
it all.
I do inner child with my guys. I've done inner child work myself.
Yeah.
It's so important. It's
everything.
Real how we can crack into that stuff and identify. Because I tell people, you know, it's like, you know, because I'm in recovery myself. You know, I speak from the podium, and I'm in a room full of like, you know, guys like you, like guys who are much bigger and stronger, tattooed, much more grizzled, right? Like this is the same thing. Like I still compare myself, you know, and I one of the ways.
You got a hell of a beard, I'll say that.
Thank
I can't
you.
grow a beard like that.
Appreciate that. You know, it was like one of the things that I say at the podium to be real and really authentic and be true to that little guy inside of me is that like I'll look out at this room full of like 40, 50, 60 guys of like that I don't know that are probably more successful than I am, more integrated, that have had these experiences, right? That I tell them, I'm like, there's still that little kid inside of me that was the same way as you, that was overly sensitive, that got bullied, got made fun of for having feelings and emotions, and really being close to my mother. My father was around, but we can get into that in a bit. But like there's still that little kid inside of me, that little boy that just wants to be accepted, that just wants to be like, hey man, like you're cool, right? You're part of us.
Be my friend, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a really huge aspect of still how I see it coming out right now. I have a really good relationship with that little guy. He roars at times, he stamps his feet inside, but now that I've done that inner child work, specifically through the Pia Melody way,
What's that?
So Pia Melody, she wrote the book Codependency No More. Another awesome book is The Intimacy Factor, but it's all her work around her. It's called PIT. It's the post-induction therapy work. But it's amazing stuff, and I've done that myself. I was exposed to it in the previous treatment center that I worked at, and I was actually able to kind of sit in on some of those trainings and watch that work done. I've never been formally trained in it, but there's the functional adult, the adapted adult, or I like to call the adapted teen, and then there's that wounded child. That wounded child is the one with all the wounds, right? That's the one who's hurting. Most people are in that adaptive adult or adaptive teen place. That's the addict. That's the manipulator, the narcissist, the personality stuff. That's the codependent. It's everything that we evolved as like a shell around that wounded child to protect
just
it.
repress it. He's not there. He doesn't exist. I don't have a pain body. Let me adapt and form and
exactly.
create survival around this to shut this guy up.
Of course, and it's the same thing as like we see when people put down the substances, it manifests in other ways, right? Like with like, you know, I mean, of course, like we, you know, exercise and food, right? Very healthy, but we can go over the bend with that.
Oh yeah, steroids, gluttony,
Tinder,
sex,
running,
Tinder,
exactly, right?
tattoos,
and that's all that adapted teen that comes out, right? All things that I've done before, right? My previous recoveries and this one, right? But the whole idea is that, again, it's the pendulum. We swing far to one side. We learn, get burnt, put our hand on the stove. That's not working for me, and we try to pull it back a little bit. But all those things manifest out of that adapted teen or that adapted adult, right? And then the functional adult is the one who's healthy, right? That person's in there. That's the one who can set boundaries, who can communicate appropriately, who can recognize, hey, you know, I just got out of a relationship. I'm feeling invalidated. She left me, right? I know she's going to, you know, she already has a new guy. I saw it on social media, and that pain comes up with that little wounded kid.
Oh yeah.
And then my first initial reaction is, all right, I got to lift harder. I got to buy this. I got to control my diet. I need more tattoos. I'm going to get on Tinder and just run amok.
Yeah.
It's all that trying to thing is like actually trying to heal and protect that little kid from feeling the pain. But what we really need to do is just like visualize ourselves getting down on one knee as the functional adult in front of that little kid and be like, hey, dude, I'm here. I get it. The adapted teens over there being emo as shit in the corner, you know, cross their arms, trying to act out. Be like, listen, man, I get it. We've done that before. It's worked, right? It's like a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. But ultimately, like, all right, well, I'm here. We're going to try to do something different. All right. And that's like that inner child thing that's so vitally important for the work that I do with my guys, even though like these, excuse me, you know, these like big tattooed guys, these successful lawyers and attorneys or whatever they do. Like I see like, all right, we're gonna, you know, like, let's talk about that inner child stuff. And I see like, all right. Right. I have to get buy-in from them.
Yeah.
But once they actually experience going back and then seeing them start to tear up, and I'm like, no, let it come out.
Yeah.
Embrace it. That's that little kid, dude. You've been face palming that little kid in the face for 20, 30 years, man. Let them come out. And then they have that break. They have that snap to where they actually get in contact with it. And then they come back next week and they're like, holy shit, dude, this little kid's running the show. This little kid is in my marriage, my business, and every other aspect. I'm like, all right, man, let's throw an arm around him and tell him that he's okay.
Yeah.
That you're here to support him. But I'm glad that you said that, man, because that's that little kid inside is such a huge component of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, damn, you're going to make me cry type thing. I mean, I've done that, what you said about speaking to him and
I can
stuff.
picture my little 7-8-year-old self in my mind right now. I know what he looks like. I know what he's wearing. I know he's bleach blonde. Like I was towhead.
I was towhead too.
I was blonde.
How the fuck were you towhead?
Dude, I don't know. At some point, it just
You weirdo.
it just snapped. Yeah.
Do you know who Garrett Muldoon is?
I've heard the name.
He was a sober cat, 30 years sober. He worked in treatment. He's since passed away, but he was down in Deerfield Beach where I got sober, and he said to me one time, I was in treatment, I'll never forget this. He goes, well, I forget the context, but he goes, how would you treat your mother's child? I'm like, or how would you treat your mother's son? I was like, I'm the only son. I got 2 other sisters. And he goes, how would you treat your mother's son? I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, there's an 8-year-old little boy in there that you're beating the hell up and not loving on him.
Yeah, dude.
And then since that, he's like, this is what I want you to do. I want you to have your mother send down a picture of you or when you were young. He's like, think about, he goes, usually everyone has that one picture of them that they can remember, right? Ask mom for it, whether she's got to make a copy, send it down, frame it, and keep it in your home and move it around. And I have it right out there.
I love that.
Little towhead. So I'll move it around the apartment, and every time I see him, I'll be like, look at that little guy, man. What's your little Ultimate Warrior slippers on, you know?
Dude.
And
it's innocent, pure, like, and then you can, like, it's just like that before the world really jades us.
Yeah, and you know what I've learned is like I cannot crucify myself or I can't judge myself for growing up in this innocent consciousness and just accepting what came to me as a young boy.
But that's what we're supposed to do. We are innocent that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And that has to be okay. And there's a lot of like, well, why did I have to go through this? Well, I don't know, man. You know, I don't know. I think that's something to bring to God, really.
Yeah, and spirituality. But then it's also in the therapeutic space, man. It's like I have a lot of guys who question, like, why did this have to happen? And I'm like, okay, man, like, what good is that doing? No, it's not to invalidate their experience.
Well, exactly.
And their
There's not an answer.
Right.
You know, and it's like, I remember I was talking to my therapist. I'm like, I started to realize, I'm like, so if this is all trauma, right? I'm like, because this is all trauma. And
that
I
hot
get
word,
it,
yeah.
and I forgive my past and all this stuff, but how is it, and I'm this guy 6 years sober, and I go, how is it not their fault then?
Ooh.
And he goes, because I know it's not, right? We do the fourth column, all that, all the shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I got real, and I was like, yo, how is it not their fault? And he goes, ooh, that's a good question.
What did he say?
He said, it sounds like the resentment is against them. He goes, what do you think? He goes, this is the little boy talking. And he goes, who else? And I was like, God. And he goes, oh, have you thought about asking him? And I was like, damn. So what he has me do is my less dominant hand will be the inner child, right? I got to sit down
I
with
love
a
that.
pad of paper. Yep. Less dominant hand is.
I haven't used that one in a while. Thank you for reminding me of that one.
Inner child. Good. And then he goes, you can write to him. You can let that little boy ask some things, but remember, he's young. He's 8. He's not going to ask some pertinent question. He's just going to say like, hey, like, I don't know why this is happening. And he goes, respond to them as you were talking to an 8-year-old. Don't give him some, and you know what
some heady existential philosophical shit. Yeah.
And you know what really ended up being powerful? And I said to my little guy, I said, you know, man, I answered to him was, I don't know, man. I don't know. But how about we just not know together? You know, I'm here for you regardless.
It's that alliance.
Yeah, man.
It's beautiful.
You know?
Because the thing is, you're right, man. It's like a lot of times people that I work with, and even in treatment, right, with like the big T traumas, the little T traumas, which is much more of the emotional stuff, the relational stuff, they want an answer of why. And they bash their head against the wall trying to figure it out. And this is something like the same thing as like I stopped asking that question myself a long time ago. You know, I'm a firm believer, and I know like, you know, we adhere to certain belief systems that are pretty similar about like the hero's journey and the growth, and we go through these trials, these things happen to us. Yeah. And there's nothing we can do about it. But it's about a matter of what we do with that information. And then through hindsight and through, of course, I'm still in therapy right now, right? Yeah. I go in like once every 2-3 weeks, once a month. If things are going well, it's for tune-up, to kind of dig a little bit and to figure out and to understand what I went through and how it's made me into the man that I am today. Yeah. Right? Like a lot of people say like, you know, I wish I was never an addict, right? I never say that, right? Because it's literally, and this is where the spiritual high toppy stuff, and you know, my natural tendency of being such a less than guy inside of that little kid, my natural tendency is to go one up, right? So that's still my natural tendency, right? The spiritual high top, I read philosophy, I do those things, but then instead of going all the way up here to where like it can be perceived as like narcissistic type traits type thing, I come up, but I identify it, and I'm able to bring it down again. Yeah. And pull it back down to it, right? And part of that is like I don't regret anything that I've been through, including the stuff with, you know, my youth and everything else like that, because with all that I've gone through, I've now come to a place where I can say that I'm mostly awake, right? I've had the opportunity to do the work. I've had the opportunity to have a spiritual experience, to become a Vedic meditator, and to really explore these things that I would never have done otherwise. Yeah. I never would have done them otherwise. Yeah. I try to get my people to understand that.
And it's hard because once a little bit of light peeks in, like in that really acute stage, it's hard to not get attached to why. Yeah. But then once light starts to peek in, you start to accept it because new types of like freedom and peace of mind come, and you realize that everything I've gone through has carved me into the person I've always wanted to be. And you know what? Like, I believe you were called to break the cycle of your traditional family. I believe that I've been called for whatever reason. I think every addict and alcoholic is called to transcend some level of pain that's been in their body, their family's body, the traditional of their bloodline, whatever. And it's hard to be like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And that's not what it's about. But that's the collateral beauty of diving in.
That's looking backwards. When you're in the shit, it's brutal, right? It's brutal. It's brutal, you know, because, you know, to talk about like the traditional side of it is that like, yeah, like the role between my mother and father are very traditional. But my mother was also like, I in my social media, I have this shirt. This is a product of a strong female. Yeah, I love that. Because women were such a massive, important role in my life. Even though my father was there, my uncles were there, my grandfathers were there. One died right after I was born. The other one died. I didn't really know him very well. But like, I had them there to show me that it was okay to have these feelings and emotions just at home, right? Like I heard that message, but then me out there in the world playing sports with my peers and everything else, it didn't translate because that societal role, my socialization, I was still having all of this other input that was being far outweighed by what my mother and my grandmothers were saying about what it means to be a man.
Yeah, they were like, don't bring that shit on the field.
No, well, it wasn't so much that. It was much more of it's okay to have feelings and emotions. You're a sensitive boy. And then I was trying to navigate that, but I'd never really had a man in my life to show me what that looked like. Right? Like my father was there physically. Yeah. Right. And he was there for me emotionally in many other ways. But when it came to guiding me into navigating these things, it wasn't there. And that's not a knock on him. Yeah. Right. I mean, I've done a lot of work to understand that our parents and my parents were not superhuman. Right. My father was a byproduct and a product of his father's generation, you know, during the war and being these successful businessmen in the 50s and 60s. Right, like Mad Men-ish type stuff. Yeah. And then my grandfather was a byproduct of my great grandfather, and it goes back. And that's the thing is like even in the men's literature, we can go back and say like these wounds are like transgenerational, but who do we put blame on? Nobody. Yeah. Right. The responsibility.
Because then we're going to go down to the Genesis.
Yeah, I mean,
you're going to end up at God.
Right.
You know.
And how far back does this masculinity and this the patriarchy and all these ideas go to, right? Which gets like a really bad rap. And I get a lot of flack from the fact of like, I speak about, specifically from some female clinicians that I know, about like, hey, the patriarchy affects me just as much as it does everybody else.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And people do not like when I fucking say that, but it's a fact, right? The patriarchy is the water, we're all the fish swimming in it, right? And that's something that is, I think, really important to like kind of put out there, because was the patriarchy that I was raised in.
Can you explain the patriarchy?
Oh, it's a big one.
I know.
So I mean, there's the political patriarchy, right? Which is something that I think is outside of my expertise to talk about, but much more of like the psychological patriarchy, which is the cleaving that I talked about, the dance of contempt, right? It's the contempt for anything feminine, which is part of the cleaving, which does, and there's that dance that we do that, you know, the women kind of can have contempt for our masculine side at times. We have contempt for their feminine side, and it does get political a little bit.
Well, isn't like the patriarchy is like society's view that men have a more dominant role in society?
Yes, and that's absolutely fact.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
100%.
And I think like the problem, like this whole toxic masculinity thing, and I don't know a lot about it, and I'm learning. I'm starting to ask questions, and I talked to our dear friend Anna, and it was the first time somebody said it so beautifully, and she was saying, when we're talking about, you know, feminist activists, she's like, you know, true feminine activists are like, we're here for you too. We're here for the guys.
Right.
Because
thank you for saying that.
Yeah, because the only way to unravel, if we want to do the toxic thing, is to allow space for men to heal, and not to say treat us different, but let's heal you so we're just naturally better people.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with men. Like I've gotten flack from people saying like, why focus on men's issue? There's so many other marginalized groups out there. And the way that I see it is that if we heal men, we raise our boys differently, we would not have a lot of the societal problems that we have. It's like not like Reagan's trickle down, but it's a full trickle down.
Yeah.
Right. When these guys come in to see me, and I I'll change that phrase, not make them. I guide them to being a better version of themselves. Therefore, they're better employers and better employees, better husbands, better fathers, better friends. The entire system that they are living in benefits from that.
Yeah, the collective consciousness changes. It can't not happen.
Right.
So like, what the hell was I going to say? Fuck.
Can I say something about the feminist stuff?
Please.
A lot of people do not understand the history of the masculine psychological world and the men's world, right?
Let's talk about it, yeah.
The whole reason that we have the men's issues field that we have is because of the feminists. Their theories, they're enlightening the society to the struggles that they have had. So
this is a good thing, you're saying?
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
100%. Like that's the thing. If like you read a lot of the earlier papers in like the Journal of Men's Studies that started in 1992 from the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, they shout out directly the feminist theorists of the 60s and 70s, thanking them for illuminating these struggles that they were having. Because without them fighting against the patriarchy, fighting against this masculine, we'll use the toxic masculine ideal, we would never have looked at this.
Yeah.
So the whole idea is that the men's world is here because we're building off of these feminist traditional ideals, which is a beautiful thing. It's what we need. And that's the whole idea, is that without that work that those women did, now they're far ahead of us in their work. Men have been left behind because there was that overcorrection. You're right. True feminist theorists and true feminist like activists have not left the men behind. But then again, it's so politicized and so over the top and so on the other side that it becomes this man-hating. And that's not that's not good.
That's not good. And like I just think like, you know, men get shit. I don't think there's a clear understanding, and I don't either, but of what people are saying when they say toxic masculinity. And I don't think it's to shame qualities of, hey, I'm a protector. I want to protect. I want to provide. Like, I think that those are all good things. Like,
they are.
I'm not trying to hold you down or don't be a boss bitch or whatever. And do like fucking A, like do it all. But I still have those and manly qualities of
keep
fucking fight and and whatever and protect and provide. Like I want that. I'm at a place in my life. Listen, I'm 35. And, don't get me wrong, I was doing drugs for a long time, so I'm a little behind the curve. So I'm like, to this point where I'm like, hey, man, like, I don't have a girlfriend or anything, but like, if I want to establish a beautiful relationship, like, there's something within me that wants to be able to take a woman on and say, hey, like, I got us and I can help this and this and this. Not to say the toxic masculinity is get in the kitchen, make sure my dinner's done, make sure my laundry's done. That's fucking garbage. But you know what? That's just broken people being broken people.
It depends, right? Yeah. Because the same thing is like, if you're in a relationship where those traditional roles are what both partner wants, great. Run it. Right. But it is that other side to where it's like, because the women of the previous generations has raised their daughters differently, a lot of women don't want that, and that's okay. Yeah. Right. But you're right. It is about like, because like Jordan Peterson always talks about like be dangerous, right? And I have mixed feelings about him. I know we were talking about this before, but there's nothing wrong with men being dangerous. It's just about being able to know when to turn these things off and when we need to turn them on. It's the same exact thing, is that we have these feelings and emotions inside. We have that feminine energy. We have that feelings, emotions, compassion, empathy, right? To where like we want to be touched, we want to cuddle, we want to do these things, but it's not okay that we ask for that. So it is about having those other traditional male identifiers as being assertive and strong and being the protector, and depending on the relationship you're in, being the provider, but then also recognizing those other aspects of that feminine or the sacred feminine that are each inside of every single one of us, right? Like this, that's the big thing about it, is that knowing what to provide, when to provide it. And I'm not talking about breadwinning. I'm talking about, when you need to be the disciplinarian to your kids, great. But then also knowing when to pull your son or daughter aside and saying like, hey, it's okay that you're experiencing this. I have had struggles too. I have emotions and feelings too, instead of raising our sons to just push that stuff away. But that's the whole idea of being able to have all of those things, not just like, and that's where the toxicity comes in. Yeah. It's only masculine, right? And it's like cranked up a notch or two. Right, to where like it's literally killing us.
Trying to be aggressive and dominant, or
not going to the doctor, not going to get our prostates checked, not taking meds, right? Yeah. Not literally preventative medicine for like, if men actually went to the doctor, we would not die from all of these horrific things.
Idiot.
But the thing is that we don't go, because if you have to take a medication for blood pressure, I'm weak. There's something wrong with me. Yeah. It's seen as this, and it's wrapped as this idea that I'm weak, which is the complete opposite of the boy code or man code. The whole idea that is wrapped up in is that I need to be invulnerable. And if I show any type of emotion, I show any type of weakness, I'm less of a man. And that's the whole idea. And that's what I'm trying to really break out in society, as well as in the sessions with my guys, of that, like, no, it's not true.
Yeah. And, I notice in myself this pendulum swing that I was talking about, from being like really oversensitive and seeing the negative affects of that in my life. And what's interesting is like the outside circumstances of my life are pretty much proof of both, right? Like when I was really oversensitive and all this stuff, I had to, and I guess I just really didn't know how to navigate it, but my life was a mess when I was like that. And what I'm trying to say is like, there's things where, and this may not be good, but I want to be like, there's parts of me that I need to be like, yo, handle your shit.
Of course.
Stop being a bitch, And I know that that's wrong. I know that, listen.
As a therapist, I'd like to reframe that language.
I know.
I get it.
My therapist would say the same thing.
Sure.
But like, whatever. I'm not a big Joe Rogan guy, but he has this thing, right? Conquer your inner bitch. And it's just language, but there is a little whiny bitch within me that wants to give up and listen to his like, oh, I don't feel like doing it, blah, blah, blah. And I was never able to transcend that. Mm-hmm. And now I have, not to the fullest degree, but like this is what happened, right? So I never had a father growing up. My stepdad, Tom, who is the GOAT, came into my life right, I don't know. I think he says it was like 8, but I think it was like 8, 10. I don't know. He came in when I was already like, fuck the world, fuck men. You're taking my mother away from me.
Sure.
Men were a threat, period, because the only pillar of safety I had was my mother.
Now, did mom pass that message on to you, or is that something you perceived, or something
It came
internally?
It came internally, because it was like, she's the only thing I got. Any other guy that comes in, you need to fuck off.
Sure.
Me and her will figure this out.
Sure.
Right. And God bless him for having to deal with that. So anyways, he's a very, very smart man. I don't want to say man's man, but he's not a big emotion guy.
Sure.
At all. Big Polak, you know. But he also does have emotion. He's spiritual. So I started to fall in love with him when I got sober, because number one, my mom was done with me, right? I had relapsed, all this stuff. And so he came in and I started to talk to him more, and I started to see him in a different light. I'm like, here's a guy who gets up at the crack of dawn, never complains, goes out, handles his shit, goes to work, provides for my mother and my 2 little sisters, and never asks for recognition. He just handles it. And I never had that. While there are obviously qualities within a man that maybe a guy that has that maybe is not super emotional, and that may be toxic or harmful for him. Sure. But you know what? I was like, I would like to adopt those qualities. And it really, really helped me.
But and you're right, because there's nothing wrong with those qualities. It's just about the balance of these things.
Sure.
Right? Like you said, like, you know, because the way that, and even though like I've done so much work on this men's issue stuff, I frame this, I literally make a living on it, but it's also a passion of mine.
Yeah.
The way that I internalized and the message that I received when you're talking about like that little bitch inside was like a feminine thing. That little bitch had feminine qualities, that didn't want to sack up, that didn't want to do these things. And I know it's like, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Right. But that's the whole idea of like the language that we've learned over the years of socialization, of like being on the school ground, and like, don't be like a girl. Don't be a little bitch. Don't be a pussy. Don't be these things. Right. And that whole idea is that don't be feminine. Right. Because the thing is that like,
which is basically like, listen, it's okay for a woman to show emotion. It's not okay for a man to show emotion.
Yes.
It's not okay for a woman to fight and speak up, and it's okay for a man to fight and speak up.
To a point.
And yeah, and that's bullshit.
Right, it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? Because the whole idea is that little part of you that doesn't want to get up, that doesn't want to go grind, that doesn't want to do those things is not masculine or feminine.
Yeah.
Right? It's
I just meant the way I talked to
No,
like,
I know. Yeah.
It's like, it's just like, sack up, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And you know what I noticed too is I haven't fully accepted and loved on that past part of myself that was really over emotional. So when I work with clients that are like that,
oh boy, does it flick something in you.
I can't stand it.
Yeah. I know that you weren't saying that with the masculine and feminine thing. I just like to make that determination, because the feminine side of it is that they have found their voice, and thank God for that. Right? Like, thank God that all these, you know, women are in society and they're starting their own businesses. They're CEOs. They're doing all those things. They're speaking up for their rights. They're doing all those things. That's great. Men, it's still wrong for us to tap into that feminine side.
Yeah.
Where women, they can pull in the masculine. They can pull in that assertiveness, that strength, that running businesses, as well as taking care of families and doing all the things that men can do. It's not okay for men to do what women do, or what represents women. I mean, Meet the Fockers, right? Or was that movie with he's getting his balls busted for being a nurse?
Yeah.
That is literally a primary example of how we're not allowed to do those things that are feminine, or even, you know, men can be teachers, right? But like these other sides of it, to where it's like, no, that's not okay. That's weird, right? Or like a stay-at-home dad. I mean, of course, in the past, 10, 15 years, that's become much more acceptable, but still,
yeah,
it's still embracing something that's much more deemed as feminine that we're not allowed to do.
Even meditation.
Yeah.
Even meditation is viewed as more of like a feminine thing. Listen.
Or yoga.
Yeah, exactly. When I go into Anatara, the couple times that I have, there's 85% women.
Yep.
Okay.
I used to practice there a lot. Yeah.
When you look at meditation retreats, 85% women.
Same thing with therapy. All these things.
Exactly. So it's like getting into these things, like tapping in and paying attention to my emotion and my inner child and all the feminine stuff has changed the game for me. Absolutely changed the game for me. And like, I hope to be an example for all men who do that, to say like, yo, it's okay, and there's freedom on the other side of this. Like, this stuff needs to be looked at.
And that's and that's the entire point of it, right?
Yeah.
Is that being the example to our sons, our friends, things like that, man, and just beating to our own drum, but doing what feels right and is authentic to ourselves and embracing all aspects of our humanity is so important.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I've gone into relationships more recently, my most recent like serious relationship, to where my partner, my ex, like, she didn't really know what to do with it. Right? Like, she would get upset about things and kind of like try to bait me into fight and yell. I'm like, I'm not doing that. Right? And I would try to communicate more effectively and pull in like that actual, like, hey, like, how you feeling? Like, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm feeling. And she would lose it because she didn't know what to do with it. Yeah. Right? So it does go both sides of it, to where like I have heard that like some women don't know what to do with a man who's in touch with his feminine. They only want the masculine. They only want this. They only want that.
Yeah, there is that.
Of course.
You know how many times I've heard women say man up?
Really?
Oh my God. Of course. I've heard it all the time, man up, you know, like, not to me, but
okay.
Well, I mean, that probably, I don't know, that probably has been a thing, but you know, you meet other women who are like, don't be, there's a lot of women who want that
Sure.
dominant, masculine, don't be a bitch, whatever, don't show emotion. Like, they want that.
Yes.
And that's what we don't call that toxic masculinity.
No, that's okay.
Or toxic femininity. It's just
right.
Being an idiot.
I mean, it's the thing is like, listen, if that's what the partner wants, great, right?
Yeah.
But then it does go down to the other side of where a lot of women are really requiring men to have that other side, and a lot of guys are not being able to provide that. That's the thing is, like you said, like in the beginning of this podcast where you asked is, how difficult it is to get guys into therapy, right? Most guys I talk to, either for a consultation call, multiple times a week, my partner's been in therapy for like 6 to 8 months. I think it's time for me to come in now. Right. It's always they're after the fact. But then once they come in, they actually start doing this stuff, like, just little simple things, like little simple communication stuff. Learning her love language, giving her what she wants, showing these things that way. They come back after like 2 or 3 weeks and they're like, it's going pretty well.
Yeah, my relationship is the best it's ever been.
Just from like a little coaching of these little tips that like really aren't therapy. Just like, hey man, try that. Right? Give that a shot.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, struggle with, I mean, you get into all this, seeking and searching and therapy and emotion in her child, but the real test is when you're in a relationship, and can you show that, or are you still a brick wall?
Right. And the same thing is like, even with all the growth that I've done, my little anxious guy still comes out in relationships. My overall attachment style is anxious.
Oh, dude, that's what got me into treatment into therapy was a fucking relationship.
Yeah, dude. So like, even in relationships where I'm feeling secure in my masculinity, I can tap into that other stuff. And women, like the women that I've found that I've dated, they do want that. But then sometimes it's like, well, I don't know what to do with it. They want it in theory, but then when it actually comes to rubber hits the road, they don't really know what to do with it. A lot of other women love it, right? Like when I can actually sit down and have a cup of coffee on like a first date, or we go out and we can actually have conversations and I'm tuned in and we're talking, like it's something like you can see it in their eyes. But the other side of that, I forgot my point.
I forgot it too.
The masculine, feminine. Nope, gone.
Let me see if I can bring us back on track. Do you guys remember what we were talking about? Absolutely not.
Okay. Yeah, pulling that stuff out, but then I think we were talking about the relationships is that, the anxiousness.
Right, yeah.
So like, even like, I know I'm providing my partner what she wants, the communication, the empathy, the actual talking, caring about her day, like genuinely being there and authentic.
Yeah.
There's still that time to where it's like that little kid comes out. Does she like you? Is this too much?
Yeah.
Like, maybe you should ask her, like, hey, like, do you, how you doing? How we doing? Right? We good? Like stuff like that. And that's like, that insecurity is actually what partners don't want. Right? To where like that can be a little bit too much of my own insecurity, my own stuff that I'm putting onto the relationship. And that's because I am in tune with what's going on inside. And if there is that little funky feeling inside, my warning system goes off and is like, hey, something's wrong. Make sure check it with her. Get validation, get validation.
There's something wrong with you.
But it's all me.
Yeah.
It's only my stuff that's coming up.
I linked up with this girl and got coffee not too long ago, and we had dated in the past. And she had wanted a relationship, and I was not about it. You know?
Sure.
I'm like, no. And this girl is fucking fantastic. Like,
love it.
Like, just fantastic. So whatever, we reconnected, and we were just going to reconnect as friends. So we thought there's probably like some subconsciously.
Yeah, let me let's
sure.
go get coffee.
Yeah. So, anyways, it went great, and it was 2.5 years ago. You're right. That we had,
it's a long time
that we had connected. So at any rate, there was no like bad blood or anything. So we reconnected, and it was like it was great, And then I was like, damn, like I think I want to like give this another shot. You know? And I expressed that. I'm like, listen, 2.5 years later, we're different people. And I was like, listen, I would love to like follow this up and like try again and all that. And she wasn't about it.
Okay.
And I was like, and that was like, and it was okay.
Yeah.
And it was okay. It was like,
it's okay.
It was like, and I was like, okay, I respect that. And what I came away with was like, okay, like I would have liked that to happen, but it didn't, or it hasn't. And that's okay.
That's okay.
And then I'm like, you know what? I just want her to be happy. Maybe she's like, I think she had expressed like she's putting feelers out there with somebody else.
Sure.
And I was like, cool, man. Like, I hope
that's
growth.
Like,
I hope like she's like legitimately happy. When first I'm like, fuck that guy. You know what I mean? Like,
that comes out a little bit. Yeah. That
like,
competitive.
I'm like, fuck that guy, dude. I'm way better than that guy.
Yeah.
But but maybe he's great.
Right.
And
there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's the same thing as like I worked with a guy like 6 months ago who he came in with the express wanting to get her back.
Sure.
Right. And we did some work about the attachment and be like, listen, man, like if that's your only goal of this, it's not going to work out well. Right. So we did a lot of work on like detaching from the outcome of that, but much more of like him just becoming the best version of himself and healing those old wounds and learning about his masculinity and how he was socialized and just becoming an integrated or mindful man. Like that's the goal for a lot of the work I do with guys.
I like that. Integrated and mindful man.
With integrated and mindful is being mindful of those emotions and feelings, but also integrating and reintegrating that feminine back in. So he's okay with the feelings and emotions, and he gave it another shot, and she wasn't about it. And he was hurt.
Yeah.
But it was okay, right? Is that like I'm allowed to experience this pain. I'm allowed to experience this invalidation, the whatever it might be, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to be okay.
It doesn't mean I'm flawed.
Yes.
It just doesn't mean, it just means she doesn't want to.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're a piece of shit.
Right.
Right.
Because the same thing, like you said before, that little picture of your 8-year-old self, man, like every time I tell that to my clients, I'm like, you're calling yourself a piece of shit or a piece of garbage. You're shaming yourself.
Like, would you ever speak to that kid that way?
Yeah.
I would never speak to that kid that
Right.
way. Ever.
And then
I'd be like, look at your towhead mullet. You're the shit.
But then, so I reframe it to them that way, and they're like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm like, you are literally telling that little 8-year-old version, that 10-year-old version, that 5-year-old version of yourself that he's a fucking loser and a piece of shit.
Yeah, don't speak.
Yeah.
And like to go back to the feminine thing, you know, have you seen the Disney movie Aladdin?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So that's my favorite Disney movie. And Jasmine.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's and this is.
I don't think I have it for every
This is
Disney
Joseph
movie.
Campbell shit right here. There's a message and everything.
Yeah,
like the hero's journey is in every fucking Disney movie ever, right?
Yep.
So in Aladdin, Jasmine, right? Well, each of the characters, Aladdin has a boo. Jasmine has Raja, the lion, and Jafar has, I forget the parrot's name. Do you guys know the parrot's name? It was some weird-ass name. But anyways, these animals are a representation of their inner nature. So Raja, right, Jasmine, the whole thing was she was not allowed to leave the castle. She was not allowed to speak. You're to speak when to be spoken to. You're there to look pretty,
That Indian
But
caste system.
Every time Jafar spoke to her badly, Raja would roar up.
Oh.
So Raja was the inner lion that wanted and needed to come out. And Aladdin taking her on the magic carpet away from the castle was her starting to find her voice. And then she started to say, no, Jafar, and all this stuff. So these animals were representation of what they needed to come out. Dope, right?
It's beautiful.
Yeah. And so I want to run some. Here's an example of having the innocent consciousness of a child, and a new paradigm is given to, which is like four agreements, right? Like they give you agreement and you say yes. Okay, now I'm going to take this on. I remember walking in the mall with my uncle. I was maybe like 14 or some shit, right? We're walking in Great Northern Mall, and I had my hands in my pockets. You know, it was like winter. I was cold or some shit. And without missing a beat, he was like, take your hands out of your pockets. It's a sign of weakness.
Really?
Okay? Yeah. So, and I don't know why I remember that, but from that moment on, I was now stricken with fear, and I need to present this way. So the world, because he told me, and what he's basically saying is, don't look weak. And if you have your hand in your pocket, shoulders back, arms swinging, whatever, Conor McGregor walk, you know, whatever.
The swagger.
And I love my uncle. He's the fucking man. And he probably didn't realize what he was doing.
No, that's the thing, is that the previous generations had no idea
No clue
that they were passing this on.
So like when I got sober and this shit started to come up, I had to oppose that belief system. And sometimes I'll walk purposely with one hand in my pocket, just because. You know, so it was like, and I'm like, and it just gave me that fear. So now I walk down the street and I'm overcome with anyone. Now I'm just like, if anyone sees me, my hand must be out of my, you're no longer walking. You're walking a gauntlet of fear and shame and guilt of how I need to look. And damn, talk about oppression, emotional oppression.
It's the same thing with guys, man. We're taught that if we have a bigger chest, to walk out with our chest out. We don't get good breaths, and that's why we're all short of breath.
And you want to know what's interesting is that was just a little innocent, silly detail, a little comment, but it had such a profound impact on a young mind.
It was the pebble that fell off the large precipice of a mountain and turned into this mountainous, monstrous snowball avalanche at the end of it. And that's exactly what our socialization process looks like. Yeah. It's rough. But the thing is, like, the deprogramming of those things, it doesn't go easily. It's difficult.
And yeah, and the deprogramming is right. Like, I remember I felt like such a wuss because I was so insecure that, like, my cousin Kev and his homie Brian, they were just bad kids, you know. They were fucking robbing people all the time, never in school, doing mad drugs.
Dang,
and
like
I'm
bad.
And I'm like, yeah, so bad. Brian actually passed away from a drug overdose, R.I.P. And I wanted to be that. So I would go out, I would start fights. I had to learn how to fight. I would fucking put rolls of quarters in my hands and go just do horrible shit. Because I inherently thought there was something wrong with me. So I was reaching for this message, this image that I thought was going to make me feel better. And it destroyed my life. And that's just another perfect example of not having that masculine and feminine combined role at a very developmental stage in your life to say, hey man, this shit ain't cool, by the way, and how you are is beautiful. Let's find a balance, you know.
But you brought up a great point, because it's the way that we're raised to believe how boys should be and how girls should be. Right. Like, you know, the boy who, you know, hurts himself, oh, boys will be boys. Right. One of the most, you know, the most devastatingly tragic thing that we could say to a young boy is, boys don't cry, be a big boy. Right, which literally translates into the hands in the pocket thing. Right, we're taught that from a very young age. But the thing is, like, if we look at the riskiness of youth and like the, you know, the trying of the drugs and alcohol, I mean, you know, who drowns more, men or women? Men. And it's most of the time when they're drunk. But it has nothing to do with the fact that it's something genetic within ourselves. It comes down to the societal idea of how men should act. We take more risks because it's this idea that boys and men are supposed to take risks. Now, of course, it is like, it does get down to the chicken and the egg if you read the literature about, you know, is this, you know, because, you know, most men can take risks because they're allowed to, specifically white men, right? Is that the societal thing? Is that a cultural thing?
But what do you mean by risk?
So like the actual risky things, like, you know, action
like
sports, driving fast,
but
unprotected sex, like using drugs and alcohol, trying these things. It's because we're supposed to, and if we don't, we're weak, we're scared, we don't have courage, et cetera, et cetera.
See, I don't know if like I completely understand the concept. I do believe that men inherently have an adventurous, risky spirit. Like, I just, that's something that I've been always extreme sports. I don't think it was ever like told to me or be a risk, and maybe society has a role in that, but I just think that there's more men out there that have this adventurous, gnarly, go into the mountains for 5 days and then hike and come out and take your paddleboard out into the middle of the ocean and free dive with sharks.
Yeah, I get it, dude. I'm into all that stuff
You
too.
know?
But the same thing, if we look at it now, I mean, you go on social media, there are thousands, if not millions, of women doing that as well.
Exactly,
right?
100%.
And it's not something that we're told specifically, like, hey, take risks. It's something that we just perceive and we pick up, right? It's the whole idea is like, let's say if I fall on the playground and skin my knee, right? You know, it's bleeding. I start crying, and the teacher, my father, or my mother, or someone comes over and says like, oh no, it's okay, rub it off. Like, don't cry, go play again. That's how we are formed and have this and understand this perception that, hey, I'm supposed to be doing these things. It's not something that's inherent in us. I get it, dude.
Yeah.
Right? Like, listen, man, some of us just have the call of the wild. Dude, after I graduated college, I had an existential crisis, right? I literally just drove to Colorado and lived there for a while. And I worked at a ski resort. And I was fly fishing and hiking.
Oh, that's awesome.
Jumping
I've
off
always
the
wanted to
cliffs
end
and
up in Colorado.
Yeah, dude, I did that because I was running from things, right? But I'm always a big adventure guy. I'm really tapped into that recently because I've been trying to grow the business. And
Well, you're on an adventure of your lifetime right now, and
Right.
it includes
And
helping other men.
It's reframed it in a different way. To now, the things that scare me most are not going into the woods for a week and soloing like I've done multiple times before. You know, it's not paddleboarding across the Boynton Inlet on a 14-foot carbon fiber board that's like this wide. It's a race board when boats are going by. Yeah, my adrenaline gets up a little bit. But now what scares me most is like getting into like a real committed relationship, meeting her.
Yeah.
Someone that actually meets my ideal partner characteristics and actually giving it a fair shot, which I've done before. But like that's what's scary to me now. Not going out there into the woods, not hiking, not doing any kind of stuff like that, right?
Isn't that interesting?
It's wild.
Yeah, it's
right?
wild.
Like what? Like, you know, same thing. It's like, what if you fuck it up?
Yeah, let me go free solo a cliff rather than fucking. I'd rather go free solo a cliff
Right.
than talk to you about how much I like you.
But the thing is, like, it's like I can do all that stuff, right?
funny.
I can do all, like, talk to how I really feel, et cetera, but then, like, what that really looks like to, like, and I have this fantasy about, like, committed relationships, like people who really click, right? Who are, like, together, who, like, that's their person, right? Because I believe there's multiple people on the planet for us, right? There's too many of us. But what that looks like, how do I maintain that? How do I keep that going? And that does look like all the work that I've done on myself with the feminine and what I try to guide my guys to do to either repair their relationships, to help them become that better version of themselves, but to do those other things that really scare them, which for a lot of my guys is that vulnerability, that intimacy.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have a problem really letting somebody in. For me, it's like the entire wrapped package, not the specific pieces of it. I feel like I have a handle on those to a point, right? It's just all of it together at once. That's like, oh, I don't know if I can do that, right? It's terrifying, but that's what scares me now. And that's the adventurous sides where it's like, yeah, I'm not, you know, paddleboarding with gators like I did when I was in my first few years of sobriety, like literally, like gnarly, like felt more alive than I have in
fuck
years.
that. We'll never do that.
Yeah, dude, it was gnarly, right?
I see people kayaking next to gators, and I'm like, no way.
Dude, I was out at Arthur
No
Marshall.
fucking way.
I brought my paddleboard out there. They had a canoe trail. I was like, oh, cool, canoe. What is a canoe? What doesn't a canoe have that a paddleboard does?
Stability?
No, fins.
Oh, yeah.
So they had
stability.
stability,
Okay.
right? So it had the fin in the back, right? So like it had all these sticks and everything else like that, and I was like struggling to get out there. And I was like, this is right before I started my job at Boca Detox with Guardian. I come around a corner, I'm like, I see a little mile marker thing. I'm like, oh, okay, it's gonna say like 3 miles because it's a 5 mile loop. It said 1 mile, right? And then I came around the bend and like I saw the back end of a gator, like probably 5 feet of a tail, go into the water and come at me underneath.
Fuck that.
Right?
I'd commit suicide
It's
right
mud
there.
trail, dude. My adrenaline was going so much, I was shaking, right? But then I was like, I can't keep going. I'm gonna get eaten. So I come back, but then I realized I got a paddleboard on top of that gator again. But I remember I never felt more alive in that moment because of the adrenaline. But I remember talking to my higher power, and I was like, God, like, dude, I got like 2.5 years sober. I made it through all my pancreatitis, all my drinking, all of those things, right? I don't want to go out this way.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to be that guy who got sober 2.5 years, started to build a life. I was in school from a master's degree that got just juxed out by a gator, right? But I still love that kind of stuff. But I think now I just have a better idea of like, hey man, I'm trying to build a career and a life, and I want to have a family. I want to do these things. So I probably have to kind of dial it back. The reason why I haven't bought a motorcycle down here, right?
You shouldn't do that anyways.
No,
it's insane.
I wanted one for years, and then I said, like, hey, if I get 5 years sobriety, maybe I'll pull the trigger. But then I was like, listen, man, I'm not going to ride one for like a little while, because if I ever have a family and have a kid, getting rid of the bike.
You got a dope ride, right?
Yeah, the
You're
caddy.
always cruising.
Yeah,
I see you.
But that thing's also like 2.5 tons, surrounded by steel. It's much safer. But yeah, no, I get.
You're cruising down A1A.
Troll,
Vibing. What does a guy like you put on the aux for something like that?
It depends.
What are you listening to?
It depends on what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is like tapping in. Like it's funny, like doing
Lil
like
Britney Spears, maybe.
No, but I'll do Shaka Khan.
I don't know what that is.
Shaka Khan.
Paul knows fucking.
Oh yeah. Ain't nobody.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Is like I'll go down, A1A, like past people playing that type of music, and I'm not like having that masculine side, like, oh, should I have like Motley Crue on or Nas or something. Like I'll listen to Motown, like all that funky stuff, because I can enjoy it now. I don't have to like prove my masculinity as much. I'm not cured.
Sure.
Right. Like I walk into a room with a bunch of guys, or if I have to go somewhere, and it's like, I'll still like, still walk upright a little bit more, but just it's part of my, development. But yeah, big fan of Shaka Khan, funk. Yeah, I really dig all that stuff too.
You bring up a good point about walking into a room with other men, and you kind of like, bow up a little bit, right? Like, so as I said, growing up, because I only had my mother, men were just a threat to me. Okay?
Yeah.
And when I started to get my shit together and all that, I realized how intimidated I was. I mean, dude, I could walk into a barber shop, open the door, and there's just men, and I'm just like, you're just for no reason, just intimidated, right? And the toxic voice would be like, "So you're a bitch," like, you don't even know these guys, like, whatever. So I had to oppose that belief with intent. So let's say I went into a barber shop, or I'm at a meeting, and I'd be looking over there, and there would be, whatever, Andrew and Paul. I'd be like, fuck those guys, man. But that was really just me being scared of them for no reason.
Sure.
So I would have to go up to them, shake, hey man, what's going on, man? My name's Scott. How you living? I like those violet Crocs. How you living? What's going on? And then I shake the hand, dap them up. Next thing you know, we're talking. I'm like, this guy's actually fucking awesome.
Yep.
And so you have to literally go right where you get jammed up and get a chance to unravel that belief system that was given to you as an innocent child.
And that's the same thing with the feelings and emotions. These guys I can see them start to tear up when they start to shift their body language in session. And one of the biggest aspects of working with men in therapy is the affect. Is that like I can't allow that emotion to start coming up and me just keep going. I gotta dial in on that, because I need to make it okay. And also for them to have the experience of, hey, I can experience these things, I can express these things in front of another man, right? Being a male clinician doing men's issue stuff is almost perfect, because I can model what it looks like to be compassionate, empathetic when they start to have these experiences, right? It's the same thing. It's like when I first started working as a therapist, I had major imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So like if I would walk into like a veteran thing, like, a networking event, right, with all these veteran clinicians, they know what they're doing. They're going to find out that I'm not good, right? It wasn't so much about the women. It was always the other male clinicians.
Yeah.
Right? Because these guys had what I wanted. They had careers, they had families, they had all these things, and I was still starting out, and I saw them not as a threat so much, but just, I guess it was a threat, but that they would find out and that they would sniff me out as being an imposter.
Yeah.
That I'm not supposed to be here, right? And like in the rooms,
I have that too.
Yeah.
I'm always talking about these perfect spiritual ideals, and what job I have, and like you're always talking about these beautiful things, and you're like, but like the reason why I'm into this shit so much is probably because how fucked up I am. What I mean? And you got to, there's a reason why we're 100%. Called into this discipline,
Yeah.
But yeah, imposter syndrome is a bitch, because you're like, well, what if they sniff me out? And you're like, well, why do I feel that there's something secretive for them to find out that makes me fake? Isn't this what I love? Aren't I doing what I love?
But it all goes back to that not being good enough feeling inside.
Yeah.
Right. We talked about why I got on this journey, or you mentioned it earlier. The reason why I went down the men's route is because I realized after going through these experiences of my recovery and as well as therapy is that like I had to kind of learn to do it on my own. Of course, now I had an amazing model in my father of what it looked like to be a man in the community, to give back and to provide and to, work in the garage. Man, I'm really handy. He taught me a lot of that type of stuff, but I was never taught what it looked like for a man to be really in touch with his emotions and navigate them properly. I had to navigate that on my own, right? And I think I'm grateful for that experience, 100%. I wouldn't change anything for what it was. But it gave me that wanting to find the answer to these things. Reading Joseph Campbell, going into the men's side of, you ever heard Robert Bly?
No.
Robert Bly wrote a book called Iron John. It's about men like really tapping into their wild side. And it was an answer to the over-feminization of men in the 60s and 70s due to the feminist movement. So it's a correction, right? So where it's like, no, like, yes, keep all those, feminine aspects, feminine, right? They're not actually nothing to do with gender, it's just what we deem as feminine, of the empathy, compassion, the softness at times, et cetera. But we also need that wild side. And reading Robert Bly and reading all of these
things, I love that. I agree with that so much.
You should read Iron John. It's a seminal work,
okay.
Came out in the 90s, but like that was a big part of me to really understand that, hey, I do have these feelings and emotions. I've had them my entire life, but now I need to learn how to actually properly tap into them. And for me, that really meant like getting in touch with a lot of things that scared me. Right? Like you had Maris on the pod, right? She's one of my closest friends. About 4 years ago, the universe brought Bonnie, Maris, and I together. Right? We were all practicing it on guitar, and like it just brought us together. And what I gained from them was that feminine side, was the astrology and all the other stuff. Like all
I give her so much shit about that. But I love it.
I don't I tell people I don't believe in it, but you better believe that I'm reading my thing from Moon Omens every day when it pops up on my Instagram feed, and I'm reading it like, oh, what's it gonna say today?
Yeah.
Right, but that's the thing, is like getting into what's scary, what's uncomfortable, and really challenging myself. Because if I'm comfortable, I'm not growing. If I'm uncomfortable, I'm growing. There's something shifting, something moving around. It sucks, but I wouldn't change it for the world. And that's like my driving ideal, what I strive for now is like knowledge and experience. That's like my passion, that's my purpose. It's not a career, it's not a partner, it's not this thing or that thing. For me, the driving force of like my passion for the rest of my life is going to be gaining knowledge, transitioning that into experience, which then hopefully becomes wisdom. Like I want to be that old dude at like 80 years old in this big room with like, mahogany, if I can afford it, right? Mahogany shelves and books everywhere, and I'm burning incense and just kicking it, doing like yoga. Like that's my goal.
Yeah, we will be best friends because that's also what I want.
I love that.
You'll have a way better beard, and I would like to throw in a pipe with tobacco in there too.
Cigars. For me.
All right.
Cigars.
We should link up for a stogie sometime.
Yeah, I'm game.
We've never sat down and talked like this before.
Honestly, because in the spirit of vulnerability, I've always been really intimidated by you.
Really?
Yep. Absolutely.
Huh.
When we were working over at our your current place of employment, like there was always that like, I don't know if he likes me.
Yeah, I felt the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was never that I didn't like you. It was always that like I felt that energy, and I think it had to do what we talked about earlier of that. He's got bigger muscles. He's got more tattoos. He's tapped into this. He's tapped into that, right? And it's like, sobriety time has nothing to do with it, right? But that definitely always played a little bit of a role in that, right? And it was always like kind of a vibe that I got. But again, that's my own shit. Yeah. Right.
One of my inner voices is I'm not smart enough. And you're such a smart guy, and like your vocabulary and the way you speak and process things is like, I'm like, oh my God, he's so fucking smart. Like I'm an idiot, and shit. Like, so it's just, and this is like when you work with men, you start to look at, and I do that too in a different way, and you start to get lists of fears and you're like, we ain't so different. Right. We all got the same fear, the same sexual fears, every fucking thing. We are so alike.
It's the human experience.
Yeah, but we walk around with our chest out and well, fuck this guy. It's like, dude, you both are scared motherfuckers.
Dude, it's the same thing, dude. Like when I get tattooed, I go to Black Pelican, right?
Yeah.
I was getting tattooed.
The spot.
I
That new tat is fucking sick, by the way.
Thank you. I always talk to, and I always make the joke with Bonnie and Mare about like being around those guys, right? Like those tattoo artists.
Yeah.
Like, they are so much cooler than I am.
They're so cool.
Right? To where I always make the joke that like I could be, when I still vaped or smoked, I could be outside at like a break with one of the other guys.
Yeah.
And be like, man, it's like, it's such a, it's so, I can literally say like, oh, it's such a beautiful night. And they'd be like, man, this night sucks. I'm like, yeah, it's not. Like, this night's so stupid. Like, I hate it. Like,
Dude, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like, I was thinking that too.
I hate Florida too, man.
Exactly. And it's still like, at 36 years old, business owner, heavily tattooed. Like, I still have that, like, hey, like, just pat me in the head and tell me that I'm cool.
Yeah.
Like, mentality behind it.
They got the fucking chains, got the gold teeth in front. I'm like, fucking, I want that,
Yeah, like, they're completely covered and shit like that. And it's like,
I'm gonna get a fucking face tattoo next so I can be cool when I walk in there.
Yeah, no, it was like literally, and that's, I mean, I'm very comfortable there now. I walk in and they're like, oh, what's going on, blah, blah. But when I first started getting tattooed there at that shop, like 6.5 years ago, like when I was like 6 months over or like a little bit, like I was still in halfway, right? Like I remember going there one time, and then every time after that for like 2 years, I would literally pick out what my coolest, funkiest, hippest clothes were that I was gonna wear to the shop.
That's so
just
funny.
so I could be like, oh, okay, he's cool.
That's so
right,
funny, bro. Everybody does that.
Everybody does that kind of stuff. Too.
Yeah.
And it's just like I like to talk about that stuff to get it out there, be vulnerable. Because also like I laugh about it now.
You got it, man. And it's being able to talk about this that shows that you have freedom and detachment from it.
Yeah, it's like, of course, man.
Because if you can't talk about it, you're under the weight of it,
Right.
But anyways, man, I'm so happy that we did this because
me too, man. This was awesome.
You're a hell of an individual. You're doing incredible work, and I know you moved your schedule around for your practice to come here, and I can't thank you enough. And I would love to come to one of you ever do like a group thing or whatever, and you have my full support in any way that I can help. And
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're doing fucking incredible work, man, and it's beautiful. So thank you for coming on.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me.
Always, you got it, man.